I have I think like most people in politics, I have boxes where I've accumulated all sorts of knickknacks and photographs and everything else over the years. And I was going through one of those boxes, and in it, I found an old BlackBerry, and and I picked it up and I said, "Huh." I said, "This is the BlackBerry that I used, and it's the one I handed John McCain that he used to place his concession phone call to Barack Obama." And it was on this phone that he became the first person really who mattered, who addressed Senator Obama by what we now know him as President Obama. And he addressed him and congratulated him as Mr. President-elect. And when you look at the conspiracy of lies that has stripped faith and belief in the outcome of what was the freest and most fair election in American history, as a matter of fact, there is nobody, with the exception of Donald Trump, who did more to undermine that reality, that truth, than Ted Cruz.
That's right.
And so there are two parts to the American crisis that we face, in my estimation. The first is the crisis of lying and liars, and the inability as a result to be able to differentiate between what's real and what's false. And the second issue is a crisis of cowardice. And that is emblematic of what you described in Kevin McCarthy, who we know through his own words and his own responses, judging incorrectly that his party would have no tolerance for an insurrection, when in fact it turned out that it did, but that he knew it was wrong what he was watching. And in the end, he kowtowed to the worst impulses out of expediency. And he's certainly not alone. But atop of the pyramid, when it comes to dishonesty, premeditated, absolute dishonesty, lying at a pathological level, and then the cowardice defined as accommodating and accepting everything that you once denounced as wrong and is manifest for your reasons to running for the U.S. Senate in the first place. And Ted Cruz is on top of that pyramid as well. And so what I wanted to ask you is to talk about his dishonesty and to talk about the cowardice, because they're real, they're elemental in the race. And I say this as someone who grew up in New Jersey, who lives in Utah, to you as a Texan. You're not pulling your weight sending Ted Cruz to the United States Senate, in the same way Utah isn't pulling its weight by sending Mike Lee to the Senate, although somewhat redeems itself by sending Mitt Romney to the United States Senate. But at the end of the day, all of these people aren't just showing up in Washington, they're being sent there. And what's really remarkable from someone who's not a Texan, but appreciates Texas's history, how does Texas accommodate the dishonesty and the cowardice, which seems so, if you understand Texas history, antithetical to the values of the state?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think you go back to Ted Cruz's speech at the 2016 Republican convention, where he told people to vote their conscience. And you fast forward to 4 years later, where he is the senator who objected to the results in Arizona. Uh, really quickly, I just want to talk about January 6th because I was there and I was about 50 feet away from Senator Cruz when he objected. I was a member of the House leadership team, and we had a limited number of members on the floor because of COVID. And so I was on the floor, and I remember, you know, when we were going through the states, you know, Alabama, Alaska, we get to Arizona. As you know, it takes a member of the House, a member of the Senate to object to the counting of the electoral college votes of a particular state. And Paul Gosar, you know, there's always a kind of crackpot member of the House who objects. That happens almost every session, as we know. But there's usually not a senator. You know, Paul Gosar objects in the House, and who's the senator, of course, who stands up? You know, it's my junior senator, you know, Ted Cruz. And I'm sitting there thinking, what does Ted know at all about what happened in the election in Arizona? He knows nothing about it. But fast forward just a few minutes later, we split into our separate, the House remains in the House, the Senate goes back to the Senate, separate sessions to debate the results in Arizona. And I start getting texts from my staff and from my wife asking me where I am. I'm kind of annoyed because I'm on the House floor, I'm working, you know where I am. I'm in the safest place in the country outside of the White House. And, you know, but they were seeing a very different story playing out on TV. They were seeing this mob that was starting to breach the Capitol. And I remember they interrupted our results. They swept the leadership teams off the floor. We put Jim McGovern in the chair. We're trying to continue the proceedings. And at some point, the Sergeant at Arms, representative from Sergeant at Arms, gets on the microphone and tells us that the Capitol has been breached, that tear gas has been deployed in the rotunda, which to me is just unimaginable. This like temple of American democracy. Anybody who's ever been to the Capitol, look up in the rotunda and tell me you don't feel something. And to reach under our seats for these gas masks that are underneath there that I didn't even know were there. And I sent my wife a text who was at home with 7 months pregnant with our son Jordan, who wasn't yet 2 years old, and she was 7 months pregnant with our next son Cameron. And I sent her a text that I didn't really think I'd ever have to send in this job. You know, I said to her, you know, whatever happens, I love you. And, you know, being the only former NFL linebacker on the floor, I take off my suit coat and I'm literally preparing to have to defend a door because we have barricaded the doors with furniture we use for paper. And the few Capitol Police who are part of kind of the protective detail of the floor who are there in suits have their guns drawn, and there's no way out at this point. And some of my colleagues joined me and took off their suit jackets, some of the particularly of the younger men. And at that point, you know, I thought that might be where we'd have to make a stand. Luckily, the Capitol Police, due to their bravery, and I mean their incredible bravery, got us off the floor. But while that was happening, Ted Cruz, who had whipped up that mob and who had gone around the country talking about how this was a steal, and who was, as we learned later, part of the legal backing for trying to challenge this, and who was implementing the legal strategy, which was to try and delay. You know, he was hiding in a supply closet. And I think it does say something about who he is. And I don't think it matches who we are as Texans. I know our history well, and we're a state that's proud of our you know, history that fought for its own independence, that was its own nation, the Lone Star State, but also that has had a long line of leaders, whether you agreed with them or not, who were independent, strong voices, who didn't just follow, but who led. You know, from George W. Bush to LBJ to Sam Rayburn to Barbara Jordan, a long line, George H.W. Bush, of, you know, Americans who, whether you agreed with them politically or not, you have to say that they were independent leaders who stepped forward and were an important voice for the country. Ted Cruz is not that. He's someone who is, you know, he knows the difference also, Steve. I think we both know that. He knew that Donald Trump lost that election. He's a Harvard-trained lawyer. He's somebody who knew what he was doing to the country, but he had decided that it was in his political interest to do this. And that has to be punished at the ballot box. We're seeing Donald Trump getting some element of accountability through his indictments and arraignment. We'll see where the trial goes. A jury of his peers will decide. But for Ted Cruz, that accountability is going to come in this election, in a state that he only won by 2 points last time, and that we can beat him in this time, because it's not who we are as Texans.
Thank you for listening to my political commentary. If you like what you heard today, Please also consider subscribing to The Warning daily newsletter on Substack. Our democracy hangs in the balance. The 2024 presidential election is the most consequential in America's history. It's not hyperbole, it's a fact. That is why the mission of The Warning with Steve Schmidt is to help readers orient to the currents that are shaping our times and the unseen forces driving politics that are very rarely discussed on cable news. Please sign up at Steve Schmidt, SteveSchmidt.substack.com. Again, steveschmidt.substack.com, or at the link in the show notes section below. Thank you to each and every one of you for listening and watching. When you think about Ted Cruz hiding in the closet, you just said something, and I want to bring you to that moment. You said it very calmly, a lot of Texas in you, the way you said it, a lot of cowboy. You were preparing to make your stand. Tell me about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, as I said, when I sent that text to my wife, it's the kind of text I think you see, and we've learned later that Mike Pence's Secret Service detail was also contacting their families and telling them, we don't think we're going to make it out of here, and saying their goodbyes. I was in a very different situation because I had a number of my colleagues who are older and who were looking to me in many ways, I think, to defend them. And my thought was, maybe we can hold this off long enough so that the other folks can get off the floor. That was my thought in the moment. Obviously, and thankfully, it didn't come to that. But all of the doors had been locked, Steve. The alarms are going off. People are putting on these hoods. I call them gas masks, these hoods to protect against tear gas. It looks like there's no way out. And a few of us. No, I didn't put it on. I was holding it.
Because you're getting ready to fight.
Yeah, I was holding it. I didn't know,
Right.
I didn't smell anything. I didn't feel like it was necessary. Ruben Gallego, who, is a Marine, is standing on top of some of the chairs telling people, when you put on your mask, breathe slowly so that you don't hyperventilate. And at that moment, it just seems very much like this is what's going to be necessary. And I don't mean that in any way to indicate that to make myself seem any braver or anything like that.
Of course not. But I think this is important. Are there any Republicans standing at that door, at that rampart with you in common defense of their colleagues?
Yeah, there are, and I give them a lot of credit for it. And we had in that moment, I think, and I know from the time when we exited the floor, we all, I think, felt very similarly about it. And yeah, we had some Republicans who were standing right there, and I think Troy Niels comes to mind. I'm forgetting some of the other names, but I think there were some folks who were willing to do the right thing and to be sort of help these very few Capitol Police in any way they could. And one of the things I think that was shocking to people probably to learn was how few Capitol Police were having to do against so many and protect that line. And Brian Sicknick's family was present on the anniversary of the 6th. He's the officer who died on January 6th, and his family was there when we were speaking about it in the Capitol. And I spoke directly to his family, and I meant it. I said, your son's sacrifice allowed me to meet mine. I was able to get off that floor because they held those lines, and they described as medieval combat. And when we left, I remember looking back and seeing the officers staying behind with their guns drawn and the glass breaking. And I remember thinking, well, what about these guys? What about them? And I remember thinking about the incredible sacrifice they were making for us, because at that time we didn't know that the riot was going to subside in some way. You have to put yourself in the place where we were so close to an event of mass violence that Americans have no idea for the most part. And I think that's one of the great services that the January 6th committee did, was illustrating for people just how close senators, member of Congress, but also our brave police officers came to something that was more akin to a Civil War era battle than to anything we're used to.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss a video. Also, for more content just like this, please consider joining our Warning Premium community. You can find out more in the description below.